Ekabo, and welcome to the Ifá-Orisa tradition discussion. All right, and today's subject is going to be poverty. All right, before I begin, I want to offer an IBA, but this particular IBA that I'm going to use is a very, very old IBA that our ancestors brought with them when they came to Trinidad hundreds of years ago. So this particular IBA is very special because it's going to be said in the traditional form of Yoruba that was spoken here a very long time ago. Mo enjebare ale, mo enjeba ale oni, ale tu lemi loni. Momo je kolemi suku, momo je kolemi sara or saru buruku. Momo je kolemi selenini, aratu en roru, aratu en rukuku, momo je kon rimi, mo embe, osi ire la im, baba o mo je ki mi jire je ire la oro. Ashe, ashe, ashe. The English translation is I pay respect to you, evening. I pay my respect to you, evening of today. Night that covers me this day, don't let me accompany death. Don't let me succumb to evil sickness. Don't drive me to make a relentless enemy. He who uses darkness to his advantage. He who smells foully, don't let him see me. I am here. Please. Be for able this night. Father, certainly let me wake in health in the morning. All right? So that is the very old Yoruba prayer that was handed down. It was well preserved by someone, and I was fortunate enough to get it to use it this afternoon. So we're going to head straight into the discussion on poverty. To introduce the subject of poverty, I would give a little background why I chose this particular subject. In teaching classes on Ifá-Orisa, is a question that a lot of young people generally tend to ask. Why it is that most of the devotees of Ifá-Orisa are poor. So, because of that question, which I've answered a few times, I decided today to try to discuss the issue of what we call poverty, all right, or being poor. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to evaluate the actual word poor or poverty. All right, now the first thing is the term poor implies lack of money, lack of resources, lack of ownership. All right, so it's generally used to refer to persons who have nothing. Now, what I learned when I was studying business administration is that there are levels or different types of poverty. All right. But today we're going to look at abject poverty, where a person has absolutely nothing. All right. But to understand why there are so many persons in society who lacks is a very complicated subject. Many who are labeled as conspiracy theorists would theorize that poverty is something that society has deliberately built in order for a few to have the advantage over the many. Now, I don't know if that is so or if it is not so. The arguments that has been made for that has been very strong. But what today we are going to look at is what is business. We're going to look also, most importantly, at some aspects of the Willie Lynch Letter that, in my estimation, may have contributed to the mentality of lack. All right, I would start by reading the 6 main points that was put over by Willie Lynch to the plantation owners back in the colonial days. All right. Now, the N word is used several times during the rule, so I'm just going to refer to it as the N word. I'm not going to read the actual term because somehow I don't think that is it violates the community standards on Facebook, and I don't want my video to be taken down, so I'm not going to use that word. So the first general rule that William Lynch stated is that both horses or horse and the N-word are no good to the economy in the wild or natural state. Okay, that's his first observation. The second rule that he had, he said both must be broken and tied together for orderly production. The third thing he said was for orderly futures, special attention must be paid to the female and the youngest offspring. The fourth thing he said, the fourth rule, was both must be crossbred to produce a variety and division of labor. The fifth thing Mr. Lynch said was that both must be taught to respond to a peculiar new language. And the sixth thing that he said was psychological and physical instructions of containment must be created for both. All right. Now I want to talk a little bit about these things. All right. These things were written by a psychologist. All right. And in the times when this was written, slavery was legal. And African people were not viewed as being fully human. So the opinions that he would have expressed here would have been the prevailing consensus among plantation owners and colonists. They saw African people who were here on the plantations as less than human. In some cases, the comparison is being made here to a horse. All right? Now, the first thing he says is that by nature they were no good for the economy. And I think by that, what he would have been referring to is their ability to produce something that would have been value to the slave masters. The second rule he spoke about, that most must be broken and tied, right, together for orderly production. By this he was referring to making slaves docile and submissive to his every will and fancy of the plantation owners. All right, and these processes were very cruel. All right, in the past, I spoke about trauma and how these things are passed on genetically. All right, but as far as this psychologist, Mr. Willie Lynch, was concerned, the breaking in was a necessary part of the process in order to be able to control the slaves. All right, the third thing he spoke about is that special attention has to be paid to the female and the young offsprings. All right, again, a lot of what was done was to produce a lot of trauma, particularly in women. I saw a video making the rounds on social media recently where it was being explained by a young lady. She was being interviewed by another young lady about how traumatic it was and the reason for punishing the slaves in front of the female slaves, for them to witness the level of torture and cruelty that was being inflicted onto the male slaves. The young lady was explaining that it is natural for any woman to look to her male counterpart or her man or her husband as a leader and as their protector and as a helpful unit in the family unit, as a helpful element in the family unit to provide that protection and care. But with the process of having black men or African men scourged, punished, and humiliated in the presence of the woman, what it did is it caused two important things that was useful to the colonial masters to take place. One is the women would not respect the men and they would not look towards them for protection, which was the desired effect. That's one. Two, any male offspring that these women produce, they would attempt to protect their male children from having to be exposed to such punishment and humiliation, as a result of which they would cause their offsprings to become weak, non-resistive, and docile. All right, in the video they used, I'm not sure, but I think they used the word effeminate. All right, now let's continue. Let's not stay too much on that point. The other thing, number 4 on this list, he spoke about crossbreeding to provide a variety in order to have a division of labor. All right. Now, during the colonial era, you had house slaves, you had field slaves, you had field hands, and you also had overseers and supervisors. Many of the persons who were given the positions of authority a lot of time were mulattoes, which would have been a crossbreed between the slave master and the slave. All right. The reason they are referred to as mulattoes, the first part of that word, when you look at it from an etymological standpoint, is mule. Mules are not able to reproduce, and it's a cross between a horse and a donkey. So what they did, deliberately the slave masters would produce these mulatto children who were neither black nor white. And they would use them as instruments for their economic gain by putting them to supervise, to whip, to punish the slave. So these mulatto children were never fully accepted by their white father, nor were they accepted by the slave population because they looked different. So when they talk about this division of labor, it was mainly along those lines. All right? Those who would work in the house closest to master, in most instances, would have actually been his children. All right? And he may have had African women there who he think he could have trusted. All right? And the key word being think, because in most instances, these would have been women who he would have been having children by. All right? The other thing listed here is both must be taught to respond to a peculiar new language. All right? Now, let's talk a little bit about language, because language is how people communicate. If there is a lot of confusion and a lot of clouds where things are not very clear on what language, the ideas that language represent, it makes it difficult for people to communicate effectively, and thereby would introduce a lot of fights, confusion, and misunderstanding. Now, I would tell you this. In 1828 was when the English language that we know today was framed in Virginia. All right, which was the first state in the United States that supposedly held slaves. So the colonial masters they sat there and they framed a language specifically designed to entrap the minds of those who would use this new language. So when William Lynch here talk about they must be taught to respond to a peculiar new language, this indeed is what he was talking about. Now, I would go as far as to say this. The antidote and the key to unlocking this problem of this language confusion or this peculiar language lies in what we call etymology, where we can break down, dissect, and take apart the words that we use so that we have full mastery over the language we use as a tool. Therefore, being able to effectively transmit your ideas. So to many, they say, well, that etymology sounding like some big complicated thing that nobody could understand. Well, it's not. But like everything else, it requires time, effort, and learning. All right? But that, my friend, is a very important aspect of unlocking what is in the language and being able to communicate effectively. The sixth thing he mentioned here is psychological and physical instruction on containment must be created for both. All right? Within the same framework of language and within the institutions associated to colonialism, there have been specific efforts to control and to lock in the minds of African men and African women. Hollywood, the entertainment industry, if you listen to a lot of the music and you look at a lot of the movies and the television productions, all of these are called programs. Why? Because basically what they do is they program the mind. And the way in which they program the mind, unfortunately, is not for the best interest of making African people in particular knowledgeable on the things that are important that would work towards their unification and their freedom. All right? But we're going to go back now to the main subject, which is poverty. All right? And we're going to talk about what it is, how it affects us, and what is required for our people to come out of poverty. All right? Based on the definition, we know that it represents the idea of a lack of money, a lack of resources, and a lack of material things. So we're going to look at a few things. The first thing we're going to look at is what is money. We're going to look at about 3 or 4 things before I go into the meat of the lesson. Now, money is basically a medium of exchange. What that means is that when you go to work, the effort and the energy that you put out is so that you could have good things, the things that you like, to be able to pay for your electricity, to be able to buy the food that you want, dress in the clothes that you like, drive the car that you like. So what happens is your labor is exchanged for a wage, a salary, which is in the form of money. So what happens is money stores the energy that you exchange for it. So money is a store of value. So let's talk about what we mean by value. Value means simply what you can get in exchange that is as close as possible in worth for exchange. That is when we say value, we talk about what something is worth. So when a person goes and pays for something, what they receive should be equal in value to what they are paying for, whether it is a good or a service. So the first thing we looked at is money. What is money? So now we're going to look at what is business. The root word for the word business is being busy. The purpose of business is to make a profit or to accumulate or amass money or wealth or value, depending on what is the medium of exchange. But in most instances, it is money. So one invests in a business in order to be able to make profits on the return. All right? And the root, remember, always remember, busy, being busy, exercising your vocation or your skill in exchange for money is what business is about. But with one aim, and that aim is to make a profit. All right? So, we're going now into a few things about business so that we would all have an idea. But I want to share this one thing before I start going into the lesson. When we talk about poverty and lack, when we examine the world we live in and the systems we live in, we will discover that for a person to be wealthy, they have to accumulate money or assets. And money could only be accumulated if you deal with a large number of persons, or if you have an organized system with a few employees that provide a service for a large number of persons coming in and exchanging their money for that service. So one of the main elements in having money is dealing with a large number of people. The people in society who we generally refer to as the poor are in most instances the ones who spend and exchange their money that is accumulated by very few persons who are what we call the wealthy. And the difference between the poor and the wealthy is basically the mindset. That's one. And two is one group has power because of the money that they have or the influence and affluence, while the other group that we call poor is the powerless people, the ones whose mindset is not to accumulate, but simply to get whatever they need and exchange their money for it. So the difference between the two is the mindset. One is powerful and one group is powerless, and that is the difference. The people who are powerless is in the majority, and the people who are powerful and have the ability to draw things are in the minority. All right, so now we're going to look actually at what is a business, how it is, and what has to be considered. All right, the first thing is how a business actually works. All right, so for any person who's thinking about becoming rich, becoming wealthy, having money, the first thing they have to ask is, if they want to do business, is how does a business work? All right? The first thing any person has to realize is that if there must be a change in their financial situation, they would be required to do things differently. Change is required. All right? The first thing that one has to do is one has to be able to evaluate one's skills, or what is called skill set evaluation. You have to find out, what can you do well? What are you interested in? What have you done before that was recognized by many persons, that you were complimented for, that you were told that you did an exceptional job? What area were you trained in? What area have you been working in? What field have you been working in? What were you doing? How long were you doing it? Did you excel? Were you just average? Or were you poor? Was your performance poor, meaning unproductive? Meaning your level of artistry and skills, was it above average? Was it poor? Yes, that must be considered. And if the answer is you don't have any skills, that doesn't mean that all is lost. What it means is then you would have to try now to develop a set of skills, which means you may be required to undergo training. You might be required to do some apprenticeship. If you're interested in a particular thing and there is someone who does this with a level of skill and ability, you could go and ask the person to teach you. Spend some time assisting them. Because if you want something of value and you have nothing to offer, money-wise, then you might be able to offer assistance. And through that, have an opportunity to learn and develop a skill. Another means by which you could learn how a business actually works in reality is by taking on an interest as a hobby. All right, becoming a hobbyist, buying books, watching videos, going to various meets, getting around people who actually do this stuff. And if that particular area of interest has a very steep learning curve, the thing is with about it being a hobby is you can take your time and learn. So these are some of the things that would address how a business actually works. So if you're thinking about making a financial change in your status, that is the very first consideration. You must look at how a business works in reality, and you have to match that with the skills that you possess. All right, the second thing is, how do you evaluate a business idea? All right. Now, the important thing about any business that you must look at and consider is if there is a need for any good or service that you intend to produce, or any service that you intend to provide. You have to find out whether or not people would use this service or good or goods. So just being able to produce something at home and there is no market for it is not going to get you wealthy. So one of the important considerations before you even actually get into producing a good or service is to find out the marketability of that particular thing. Also, next to marketability, whether there is a high or a low demand for that particular product, beside that consideration, another very important aspect when you're evaluating a new business idea is who you're going to sell your good or service to. In business, it is called a target market. You have to decide who needs this good, who needs this service, who are the likeliest people to purchase this goods or service. Where are they? How do I make contact with them? How do I show them my product? These are the second most important consideration, how to evaluate a new business idea. In some instances, there are various modes of marketing, but I want to keep this discussion really simple. But one of the things that a lot of people do besides surveys is they go out and they give samples to people. And then once you give the sample, you seek to get some type of feedback. So that way you would have an idea where you are in terms of appealing to the need. All right. The third thing that you have to look at is whether your business needs a large capital or whether it's something you can just do really easily without any major capital. So the question becomes, how do you start a new business from scratch? Well, one of the ways to start a business from scratch is what is called slow accumulation of assets. If you are currently employed and you do not work for a lot of money, but you wish to open some sort of business, what you do is you make a plan, you stretch it out over a period of time, and if it's every month, every fortnight, or every week, you save a particular amount of money towards buying one thing that you need. You get the one thing and you put it aside. Following month, you do the same thing. And you would be surprised, in the space of a year or two, you may have all the assets you need. So, slow accumulation of assets is one of the ways in which you can start a business from scratch. Now, about a year and a half ago, I was interviewed on the Orisa way of life. And one of the conversations I had was about what is called Susu or Esusu. Because I read the Odu that introduced the idea of Esusu. Right? And I had a lengthy exposition of the essay Ifa. And I spoke about the importance of collective savings. All right? The Susu or Esusu is actually an African tradition. So our ancestors accomplished many, many things through collective savings. Okay? It's very ancient. So much so that I've said many times, what we have today that we call modern banking, savings and insurance came from our tradition. Because the whole idea our ancestors had was, should there be any emergencies, the collective saving would be there so that you could attend to any circumstance that may suddenly arise. All right, Susus tend to run on a fixed cycle, but of course, if you're regular on the Susu and an emergency comes up and you go and you ask for your hand early, then whoever, it would be at their discretion to decide. But it is a means by which you could attend to emergencies. All right? So I would encourage members of the community to be involved in collective arrangements like Susus. All right? So what I have here on the second on the list is community cooperative loaning, right? Or what we call Susu. All right? The other source to start a new business from scratch could be family loans. All right? If you have siblings, and you want to do something, or parents, you can go to them. And a lot of times, your family are a pretty good judge or judges of whether or not you're serious or whether or not you have the skills or the ability, because they tend to be very critical. And they would not put their money with you if they don't think you're serious or ready. So that is also a good source for financing if you intend to start a business from scratch. All right. The other question that comes up would be for persons who already have businesses. And the question would be how to improve your existing business. All right. Well, the response is going to be somewhat similar to what I mentioned above. All right. But if you have a registered business already, you might be qualified for a loan. All right. A lot of the large financial agencies do not particularly support a lot of small businesses. So you may have to consider alternate financing such as credit unions, right? And Susu, as I've mentioned before. All right. There are other areas that could help improve an existing business, such as marketing, and advertising. All right. Most people seem to think marketing and advertising are the same, but technically they are not the same thing. All right. Marketing is a general category that covers many things, including advertising. All right. But advertising is not the only means by which you can market your goods. All right. Now, with the rapid changes in technology, a lot of the older methods of marketing has sort of become obsolete. So now a lot of people is using the internet and social media platforms to advertise and even to market their goods and services. All right, so one of the things you could do to improve your existing business is to invest in advertising, or you can pay a marketing company to help you get your stuff sold or distributed. All right, and if you're looking at improving the business, then once you're looking at the social media platforms, you may have to look at various type of contracts that are possible, because you would now be looking at a worldwide market. All right. So in some of those instances, if people are in other parts of the world and they want to sell your product, you might be able to offer contracts to them to distribute your product wherever they are. All right. So the next thing, which is last on the list, is how to actually use business related skills. All right. This may have some relation to skill set evaluation. All right. But this here has to do in this case with how to use your business related skills to accomplish your personal goals. All right. So this here basically have to do with the mechanics of what we call effective decision making. All right. The first and most important part of this is being able to zoom in and determine what is the specific question or challenge that you may have, or that anybody may have for that matter. Because remember, the goal of a business in most instances is to provide a service or a good that is needed. And in many instances, new innovative products would normally fill a space that exists where nobody else is providing a good or service for. So the first thing is we have to identify the specific challenge or question. Once you could zero in on that properly, then you might be on your way to really being able to find effective solutions. The second thing is gathering the relevant information and the pertinent facts concerning the challenge or the question. So you look to all the possible sources to find out as much as you can about the business you want to do, about the service you want to provide, about the goods that you wish to produce. After you've done that, the next thing you have to look at is identifying alternatives. Right? And this is very important for many reasons. All right? The good or service you may want to provide may already be being produced and provided by someone else. That's one way of looking at alternates. The other aspect of alternates could be on your supply chain side. The things that you may need to produce what you have to produce, what you're using, and if there are alternates in terms of raw material that can be used that is cheaper, right? It's not everyone in doing business looks to cut costs, because sometimes when you produce a high quality product, you could actually ask for more and let it have a high quality and be an exclusive product where you don't have to sell high volumes to make profits. All right. The other thing on the list is weighing the evidence. All right. And this also serves as a very critical element in the decision-making process. Sometimes when you collect a lot of data, a lot of information on something, it could be overwhelming and confusing. So sometimes you may need a professional opinion on fine details where persons are qualified, who have a very good knowledge of the service or of the product, and they could give you a professional advice that would allow you to have a better understanding of the information that you have accumulated or collected in your quest to make, the necessary decision. All right. We mentioned identifying alternatives, and here now we're talking about choosing between the alternatives. All right. Which is another area too you could always outsource in getting professional advice. All right. Now, once you have chosen the alternatives, the next step basically is to take action. And that is not the final stage, even though it may appear so. Taking action is important. But after you have taken the action, you would always need to review the decision and the consequence. All right? So basically that covers most of what I'm going to do tonight. So we have looked at these various points. So we would have tonight gotten a better understanding of some aspects of what is required to do a business from scratch. Right? Now, something I've mentioned earlier, and that is about doing things differently if you wish for your life to change. If you want results, you have to reorient yourself and change the way you think. Let me explain what I mean by that. I've mentioned the William Lynch thing at the beginning of today's class. And we should understand that the people who are extremely successful is in a small number. And the reason for that is because the majority of people, the way that they think keeps them in the pool of individuals. But when one thinks differently and reorient one's thinking, understanding all that is required in order to achieve that power that would lead to success, one has to recondition one's mind. And I would give an example. In our community, we have a large number of people. If you were to open a business, and get the support of all the members of your community, of our community, it is quite possible, as long as you offer a good quality service and a good quality product, that you will be successful. When members of a community cooperate, it elevates everyone in the community. Why? Because a community does not need one service. A community does not need one product. So if members of the community were able to sit and communicate well their needs, we might be able to discover that there are members of our community with the required skill set that may satisfy some of the needs that other members of the community has. So being organized, having the right mentality, the right attitude is important. All right? So reorienting and changing one's mindset and adopting the idea of collectivism, meaning working together for the best interest of all, is one of the important elements. Another important element is developing good spending habits and investing habits and handling of your money. What is referred to as using fiscal wisdom. It is something that we should all seek to have a financial education, financial literacy. All right, and this is something in the future I would be discussing a lot of. All right, because we already spoke about having sustainable community. But now we have to start getting into getting people's mind prepared, getting people educated, making people understand how concepts of business works, how collective efforts work. Right? One of the important things, particularly when we want to talk about building a sustainable community and accumulating wealth, is we must recognize the role of women. Yes, you heard it. Correct. I said that. We need to recognize the role of women. The family unit is essential. And the backbone of the family unit, we like to say is the man, but it ain't really the man at all. And I will explain why. In the family unit, the one who bears the children is the woman. Oludumare has blessed females with that all-powerful creative ability. We are only contributors. 30% at that, if so, 30%. So we have to give the respect, the homage to women, because Oludumare selected them for that responsibility. Now, I would explain further why this is so important. If your family was to accumulate wealth, and your spouse is not actively participating in the process, and she is responsible for educating your children or in your family, then all of the wealth that you're going to work hard and accumulate with your spouse, if your children are not properly educated, they're going to destroy it in a very short space of time. So the role of the mother is the nurturer, the educator, the provider, not just for the child, for the spouse also. Because your peace of mind, your advice, your comfort, these things is what allow you to function effectively with whatsoever you do, whatever your profession or your avocation is, or your business is for that matter. Right? So it is very important that the role of women be acknowledged. All right? And I've given enough reasons for that. So let's move forward. All right? The interests of collective destiny and the importance of cooperating must be recognized in the community. All right? Because when we put our resources together, poverty is not an issue. When we put our resources together, we are going to be able to move mountains, as they say. But the little does add up to a lot. And once we accumulate all we have together, we would be able to do things. Okay? So it's important for us to get our minds right so that we would be prepared to work together with others. So the fifth thing I have here is learning to communicate. For us to get together, we have to be able to communicate and love with each other. We have to understand what we are saying and the effect it has on someone else. We also have to be able to listen properly. Not hear. I said listen. Because hearing is a passive activity. Anybody could hear. Listening is an active, engaging activity. All right? So we must understand when one person is speaking, one has to listen. And then when the other person is listening, the other one speaks. It's an exchange. You have a transmitter and you have a receiver. We can't both be transmitting at the same time. We can't both be receiving at the same time. If we are not able to communicate effectively, we would never be able to get together. And if we cannot communicate in love with each other, then we're not going to have that unity that is necessary. All right? And last but not least, this is a very, very important factor. It's called ethical conduct. Some people say moral conduct, but I will talk a little bit about each one. Ethical standards go beyond religion. It goes beyond belief. Ethical standards is something that are universal. It doesn't matter where in the world you go. An ethical person would be an ethical person. It doesn't matter what society they are a part of. People must have high standards. In our community, we refer to it as Omoluabi, where we outline specific qualities that a human being should have in order to bring oneself close to what we refer to as the perfect human. None of us are perfect, but we strive towards self-improvement on a regular basis. The other term was moral conduct. Moral conduct may not be universal, but has to do with a particular group or organization that you may be a part of. That organization may have certain expectations of you. And based on the codes that has been agreed to in that organization, one has to function along those lines if one wishes to be a part of that organization. When we talk about morals, we are talking about things that are agreed to by a group and exercised or carried out. So having good ethical and good moral conduct are two essential things if you have to be a part of a community. All right, and with that, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight. And I would like to mention this before I close off, that the Ifá-Orisa group has a community business page where you can join. It is free We do not charge anyone. If you have a good or a service, you could offer it there. If you need advice as to what is suitable to put up on whatever, you could always message me and I would guide you. I would send you a link to the page and I would give you ideas what you can and cannot put up there. All right. So again, I would like to say Odabo. Thank you for joining us. May Oludumare bless you, bless your family, bless your home, bless your community, and by extension, bless our beloved country. All right? You do good for yourself. You do bad for yourself.